Friends and travelers, however you've arrived, I bid you welcome. Here at Let's Be Frank, we're about lives, and above all, living well. I don't expect a podcast hosted by Benjamin Franklin could be about anything else. In my lifetime, I pursued the practice of moral improvement like a science, recording my successes and, yes, oftentimes reveling in my failings. It's my hope, with our weekly almanac, to give to a curious world delicious morsels of history in quick, easy-to-digest installments. Perfect for a sit in your favorite chair or a morning walk to work. At the end of each installment, I like to wrap it all up in a neat little lesson that you can apply to your own life, inspired by the events, stories, and personalities shared in each episode. So sit back, relax, and together, let's make history. Greetings and salutations, dear listener. Welcome to another installment of Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind with me, your faithful friend and host, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. As always, before we begin, some announcements. Like and follow us across the pantheon of platforms we're now incorporated within. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Be Franklin Live, Facebook at Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind. And if you wish to support the history we make, consider joining our Patreon. You can find the link in our show notes. Help new members find us by leaving a like and a review. Now, with that out of the way, my dear Junto, let's get foolish. The 1st of April, some do say, is set apart for All Fools' Day. But why the people call it so, nor I nor they themselves do know. Poor Richard's Almanac, 1760. My friends, it's the first day of April. Evidence of spring abounds as flowers bloom, hay fever runs epidemic, and all of Christendom opens their morning newspapers with a skeptical eye as the world resolves, as it does every 1st of April, to fool itself into believing the outlandish. It's April Fool's Day, which, in honor of, I'm temporarily renaming your almanac Let's Be Pranked, which requires no additional energy on either of our parts other than to suffer the briefest laugh at the expense. Go ahead. For purposes of good order, this podcast is composed of several primary sources associated with Ben Franklin's life, knit together to collect it all into one narrative on a cohesive theme. Today's installment is about the wisdom of fools, how we've captured levity over time, and is about when pranks eventually yield pragmatism. The custom of today may seem so ingrained in our cultural identity that we no longer question it. But my friends, the more we think about it, how did this particularly odd holiday come about? My friends, this week I turned to the brilliant invention of the internet with the help of my assistant, the handsome and ever-stoic Brian Austin, and found several leads, all of which seem to yield a similar result. Now, the following comes from the Library of Congress. Some people think the idea of April Fool's Day goes back all the way to Roman times, when a joyful festival called Hilaria, originally probably an equinox celebration, came to be celebrated on March 25th. In Roman terms, March 25th was called the 8th of the calends of April, which associates the festival strongly with April 1st, the calends of April. However, there's no hard evidence to connect Hilaria with April Fool's Day, so this is just one of the many guesses. Another common story, which dates back to ancient Rome, has its roots with the Emperor Constantine. As the story goes, one particular April, an assembly of fools sought audience with the Emperor Constantine, begged His Excellency to make one of them king for a day. Now, for whatever reason, the Emperor Constantine obliged, and one of the gestures, by the name of Kugel, was appointed to the position. As his first decree, he said the day would be a day of jollity, and thus created what we know now to be April Fool's Day. A fascinating story, but in and of itself, dear listener, a joke. The story actually came from a Boston University professor by the name of Joseph Boskin in 1983, who pranked an Associated Press reporter by the name of Fred Bales. The story ran and, well, fiction became fact. Foolishness became formality. I cannot say for fact how many of these origin stories are hoaxes and pranks in and of themselves. Now, people have often speculated where this holiday comes from the Roman Saturnalia, the Druidic rites of Britain, but where we start to see evidence of it appear is in the Middle Ages. Now, we see a glimpse of it in Chaucer's Nun's Priest's Tale, which shows the rooster Chanticleer being fooled by, and in turn fooling, a fox. This happens around the 1st of April, but it's still not called April Fool's Day. In France, they have something called the Poisson d'Avril, or April Fish, which is the name of a person duped on April Fool's Day. And the idea of an April fish seems to be the fact that fish were plentiful and hungry in the spring. An April fish was more gullible than a fish at other times in the year. Now, the first certain reference to April Fool's Day comes from 1561, from a Flemish poem. In the poem, a nobleman sends his servant on crazy, fruitless errands. The servant recognizes that he's being sent on a fool's errand because it is indeed April 1st. This is one of the most popular amusements on April 1st, the sending of persons on fruitless errands, sending someone to a bookstore to pick up a biography on Eve's grandmother, or to a chemist to pick up pigeon's milk. If nothing else, it's evident that for hundreds of years, people have been finding ways to make light of one another in mostly harmless ways. Speaking of making light in mostly harmless ways, your favorite printer over the course of his life submitted more than a few hoaxes and jokes to get a good laugh, even if sometimes it was only for my own sake. Now, the following account comes from 1784, during my time in Paris, when a piece of satire would, 100 years later, be picked up and become a systematic approach to how we utilize time, particularly in the fall and the spring. I'll let the source speak for itself, dear listener, and we'll speak again about it when I'm finished reading. To the authors of the Journal of Paris, 1784, Messieurs, you often entertain us with accounts of your new discoveries. Permit me to communicate to the public through your paper one that has lately been made by myself, and which I conceive may be of great utility. I was the other evening in a grand company, where the new lamp of Messieurs Quinquet and Long was introduced, and much admired for its splendor. But a general inquiry was made whether the oil it consumed was not in proportion to the light it afforded, in which case there would be no saving in the use of it. No one present could satisfy us in that point, which all agreed ought to be known, it being a very desirable thing to lessen, if possible, the expense of lighting our apartments, which, when every other article of family expense was so much augmented. I was pleased to see this general concern for economy, for I love economy exceedingly. I went home and to bed 3 or 4 hours after midnight, with my head full of the subject. An accidental sudden noise waked me about 6 in the morning, when I was surprised to find my room filled with light. And I imagined at first that a number of those lamps had been brought into it, and rubbing my eyes, I perceived the light came in at the windows. I got up and looked out to see what might be the occasion of it, when I saw the sun just rising above the horizon, from whence he poured his rays plentifully into my chamber, my domestic having negligently omitted the preceding evening to close the shutters. I looked at my watch, which goes very well, and found that it was but 6 o'clock. And still thinking it something extraordinary that the sun should rise so early, I looked into the almanac, where I found it to be the hour given for his rising on that day. I looked forward, too, and found he was to rise still earlier every day till towards the end of June, and that at no time in the year he retarded his rising so long as till 8 o'clock. Your readers, who with me have never seen any signs of sunshine before noon, and seldom regard the astronomical part of the almanac, will be as much astonished as I was when they hear of his rising so early, and especially when I assure them that he gives light as soon as he rises. I am convinced of this. I am certain of my fact. One cannot be more certain of any fact. I saw it with my own eyes. And having repeated this observation the 3 following mornings, I found always precisely the same result. Yet it so happens that when I speak of this discovery to others, I can easily perceive by their countenances, though they forbear expressing it in words, that they do not quite believe me. One, indeed, who is a learned natural philosopher, has assured me that I must certainly be mistaken as to the circumstances of the light coming into my room, for it being well known, as he says, that there could be no light abroad at that hour. It follows that none could enter from without, and that of consequence my windows being accidentally left open instead of letting in the light had only served to let out the darkness. And he used many ingenious arguments to show me how I might, by that means, have been deceived. I owned that he puzzled me as little, but he did not satisfy me, and that the subsequent observations I made, as above mentioned, confirmed me in my first opinion. I considered that, if I had not been awakened so early in the morning, I should have slept 6 hours longer by the light of the sun, and in exchange have lived 6 hours the following night by candlelight. The latter being much more expensive light than the former, my love of economy induced me to muster up what little arithmetic I was master of, and to make some calculations, which I shall give you after observing the utility is, in my opinion, the test of value in what matters of invention, and that a discovery which can be applied to no use, or is not good for something, is good for nothing. I took for the basis of my calculation the supposition that there are 100,000 families in Paris, and that these families consume in the night half a pound of bougies or candles per hour. I think this is a moderate allowance, taking one family with another, for though I believe some consume less, I know that many consume a great deal more. Then, estimating 7 hours per day as the medium quantity between the time of the sun's rising and ours, he rising during the 6 following months from 6 to 8 hours before noon, and there being 7 hours, of course, per night in which we burn candles, the account will stand thus. In the 6 months between the 20th of March and the 20th of September, there are nights, 183. Hours of each night in which we burn candles, 7. Multiplication gives for the total number of hours 1,281. These 1,281 hours multiplied by 100,000, the number of inhabitants, give 128,100,000. 128,100,000 hours spent at Paris by candlelight, which at half a pound of wax and tallow per hour gives the weight of 64,050,000. 64,050,000 pounds, which, estimating the whole at the medium price of 30 sols the pound, make the sum of 96,075,000 livres tournois. An immense sum that the city of Paris might save every year by the economy of using sunshine instead of candles. If it should be said that people are apt to be obstinately attached to old customs, and that it will be difficult to induce them to rise before noon, consequently my discovery can be of little use. I answer, nil desperandum. I believe all who have common sense, as soon as they have learnt from this paper that it is daylight when the sun rises, will contrive to rise with him. And to compel the rest, I would propose the following regulations. First, let a tax be laid of a louis per window on every night that is provided with shutters to keep out the light of the sun. Second, let the same salutary operation of police be made use of to prevent our burning candles that inclined us last winter to be more economical in burning wood. That is, let guards be placed at the shops of wax and tallow chandlers, and that no family be permitted to be supplied with more than 1 pound of candles per week. Third, let guards also be posted to stop all the coaches, etc., that would pass the streets after sunset, except those of physicians, surgeons, and midwives. Fourth, every morning, as soon as the sun rises, let all the bells in every church be set ringing, and if that is not sufficient, well, let candle be fired in every street to wake the sluggards effectually, and make them open their eyes and see their true interest. All the difficulty will be in the first 2 or 3 days, after which the reformation will be as natural and easy as the present irregularity. Oblige a man to rise at 4 in the morning, and it is more than probable he will willingly go to bed at 8 in the evening. And having had 8 hours of sleep, he will rise more willingly at 4 in the morning following. But this sum of 96,075,000 libras is not the whole of what may be saved by my economical project. You may observe that I have calculated upon only one half of the year, and much may be saved in the other. Though the days are shorter, besides, the immense stock of wax and tallow left unconsumed during the summer will probably make candles much cheaper for the ensuing winter, and continue them cheaper as long as the proposed reformation shall be supported. For the great benefit of this discovery, thus freely communicated and bestowed by me on the public, I demand neither place, pension, exclusive privilege, nor any other reward whatever. I expect only to have the honor of it. And yet I know there are little envious minds who will, as usual, deny me this and say my invention was known to the ancients, or perhaps they may bring passages out of old books in proof of it. I will not dispute with these people that the ancients knew not the sun would rise at certain hours. They possibly had, as we have almanacs that predicted it, but it does not follow thence that they knew he gave light as soon as he rose. This is what I claim as my discovery. If the ancients knew it, it might have been long since forgotten, for it certainly was unknown to the moderns, at least to the Parisians, which to prove I need use but one plain simple argument. They are as well instructed, judicious, and prudent a people as exist anywhere in the world, all professing, like myself, to be lovers of economy, and from the many heavy taxes required from them by the necessities of the state, have surely an abundant reason to be economical. I say it is impossible that so sensible a people, under such circumstances, should have lived so long by the smoky, unwholesome, and enormously expensive light of candles, if they had really known that they may have had much more pure light of the sun for nothing. I am, etc., a subscriber. Clearly a stirring piece of satire and commentary upon the sleeping habits of the people of Paris. However, 100 years later, this piece of fiction would in fact become fact. An entomologist from New Zealand by the name of George Vernon Hudson proposed daylight savings time. The same daylight savings time we temporarily loathe today, every spring when we lose an hour of sleep, and every fall when we gain an hour. The same daylight savings time which is the bane to every clock we need reset twice a year. European countries would adopt this in 1916, and the United States the same 2 years later. Much like the origin of April Fool's Day, the things meant for satire will, hundreds of years down the line, inevitably become wisdom. Now, what lesson can we derive from this episode on April Fool's Day? What lesson can we derive from this day that is designed to fool, to trick, this day full of hoaxes, of pranks, of misleading information, this day of fool's errands? The lesson, my friends, today is to simply lean into it. Go about every task as if it were a fool's errand, as if every task's sole purpose was to derive amusement. Find some foolishness in your day, and from that foolishness, my beloved Junto, derive some wisdom from it. That's all for today's installment. Would that we had more hours in the day, but as always, we have nothing but time between us. Resource materials and images from this week's episode can be found in the journal of bfranklinlive.com. If you like the show, subscribe and stay up to date with all the latest gossip, and do me the kindness of leaving a review. And, dear listener, spread the word. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your horse, I don't care. Let's make our intellectual Junto grow. And now our time together has come to an end. Fare thee well, and always remember, when you are good to others, you are best to yourselves. Until we meet again, I remain your humble and obedient servant, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, Printer. Stay curious, my friends.